A Russian MiG-29 has just been destroyed inside Kacha airbase in Crimea, while an Irtish radar system near Simferopol was targeted in the same wave of strikes. This is not just another battlefield loss. It is a high-value aircraft hit deep inside what was once considered a protected zone, and it was reached by a Ukrainian drone flying hundreds of kilometers through layered air defense and electronic warfare. For months, Crimea has functioned as a strategic rear area, where fighter jets, radar systems, and logistics hubs could operate with lower risk compared to the front line. That assumption is now under pressure, as long-range UAVs begin to reach targets that were never expected to be exposed in this way. What makes this event more serious is not only the damage, but how little room there was for error. A single missed signal, a short delay in response, or one wrong assumption can now lead to the loss of assets worth tens of millions of dollars. If this pattern continues, the battlefield may no longer be defined by distance, but by who can detect, track, and strike faster across the entire depth of the war. Stay with us, because this is not only about one successful strike, but about a shift that could change how survival works in modern warfare. So how did a Ukrainian drone pass through dense defenses and hit a MiG-29 inside a protected airbase in Crimea? The strike on Kacha did not begin near Crimea, but far beyond the visible battlefield where a long-range Ukrainian UAV was already moving toward its target hours before any alarm was raised. The drone was likely launched from hundreds of kilometers away, using a simple but effective setup that allowed it to leave quickly and disappear before any counteraction could begin. It lifted off at low altitude, stayed close to the ground, and limited its signal output to reduce the chance of early detection. This phase was not about speed or power, but about staying invisible long enough to enter a much larger system of defenses without being noticed. Once airborne, the UAV followed a carefully planned route that avoided predictable paths, and this was where the real design of the operation became clear. This was not a random attack or a one-time strike. It was part of a broader deep strike strategy where distance no longer protects high-value assets, and where even rear areas can be reached with enough planning and patience. What makes this approach more serious is the imbalance between cost and impact. A relatively low-cost drone can be sent across long distances to hit a fighter jet that requires years of training, maintenance, and support to operate. This creates a new kind of pressure where the defender must protect expensive systems against threats that are cheap, repeatable, and difficult to track continuously. At the same time, the operation exposed a critical weakness that exists from the very beginning of the mission. The drone itself is small, quiet, and hard to detect, but the people controlling it are not. Every launch leaves behind traces, whether it is a brief signal, a heat source, or movement on the ground. This means the real risk is not only the loss of the drone, but the exposure of the team behind it. This is why the early phase of the strike is not only about getting the UAV into the air, but also about escaping the moment of launch without being tracked. The crew must act quickly, reduce their signature, and disappear before surveillance systems can focus on their position. If they fail at this stage, the mission can collapse before the drone even reaches its target. From that point forward, the battle splits into two parallel tracks. One happens in the air, where the UAV continues its long flight toward Crimea. The other unfolds on the ground, where the operators must survive long enough for the strike to succeed. This creates a situation where success is no longer defined by a single system, but by the coordination between machine and human under constant pressure. As this pattern becomes more common, the focus of Russia is also starting to shift. It is no longer enough to track and intercept the drone alone. The priority is increasingly moving toward finding and neutralizing the source behind it, because stopping one UAV does not end the threat if another can be launched the next day. So the question now is simple but critical. If low-cost UAVs can reach targets this deep and create this level of risk, are they already changing the way modern attacks are planned and executed? The moment the UAV entered deeper into contested airspace, Russian detection systems began to react. not by chasing the drone directly, but by searching for the signal that revealed where it came from. Electronic warfare units picked up a brief anomaly in the radio spectrum, a short burst linked to satellite navigation that stood out against the normal background noise. That signal did not last long, but it was enough to trigger attention inside the network. From that point, the response was not rushed, but structured and layered, because the goal was not only to understand what was in the air, but to locate who had launched it. A reconnaissance drone, most likely an Orlan 10, was sent toward the suspected launch corridor, and its role was not to intercept anything in flight. It moved into position to scan the ground with thermal sensors, searching for signs that a vehicle or crew had recently operated in the area. Heat left behind by an engine, disturbed terrain, or unusual movement patterns could all become indicators that narrowed the search. At the same time, a specialized unit known for counter-drone operations was activated to manage the response. This group did not treat the UAV as the main target. Instead, it treated the situation as a human problem, where the key objective was to find and remove the operators before they could repeat the action. This approach reflects a shift in thinking, where stopping a single drone does not remove the threat if the team behind it remains active. FPV hunter teams were then deployed into the sector, moving quickly to cover possible escape routes and likely hiding points. These drones are small, fast, and built for direct impact rather than long-range surveillance. Each unit carries several of them, allowing a wide search pattern that increases pressure on anyone trying to remain concealed. Their design favors speed and reaction time, which makes them effective tools for short-range strikes against vehicles or exposed equipment. What stands out in this phase is the decision not to prioritize immediate interception of the UAV itself. Air defense systems could attempt to track and engage the target, but the chances of a successful intercept against a low-signature platform are limited, especially when detection windows are short. Instead, the focus shifts toward removing the source of the threat, because that delivers a more lasting result. This creates a different type of battlefield dynamic, where the air and ground layers are connected through signals and timing. A single transmission, even if brief, can trigger a chain of actions that moves from detection to pursuit within minutes. Once that process begins, the pressure builds quickly, and the margin for error becomes extremely small for the team on the ground. At this stage, the operation is no longer only about whether the UAV will reach its destination. It becomes a race between two systems, one trying to stay hidden long enough to complete its mission, and the other trying to close the distance to the people behind it before that mission is finished. This shift raises an important question about how modern defense is evolving. If the real target is no longer the drone in the sky, but the operator on the ground, then the entire balance between attack and protection may already be changing. So the question is clear. Do you think hunting the operator instead of the drone is a more effective way to stop these attacks? The hunt on the ground began as soon as Russian systems narrowed the search area, but the Ukrainian team did not react in the expected way, and that decision changed the entire outcome of this phase. Instead of moving fast to escape the zone, the operators chose to disappear in place, shutting down the engine, cutting all emissions, and turning a moving target into something almost invisible. The vehicle was hidden inside a damaged structure, its outline broken by debris, while thermal blankets were placed over key surfaces to reduce heat contrast. Every action was focused on removing signatures that could be detected from above. This choice went against the common assumption that speed increases survival, because in a battlefield covered by sensors, movement often creates more signals than it removes. Tracks on soft ground, heat left by tires, and the brief exposure during relocation can all become indicators that guide surveillance systems toward a target. By staying still, the team avoided creating new data points that could be tracked over time. Above them, the reconnaissance drone continued scanning the area with thermal imaging, looking for irregular patterns that did not match the natural environment. The camera did not search for a clear shape, but for small differences such as warmer patches of ground, compressed vegetation, or residual heat fading at a slower rate than the surroundings. Each of these signs could suggest recent human activity, even if no movement was visible. At one point, a faint anomaly appeared in the sensor feed, likely caused by ground disturbance rather than direct heat. The operator redirected focus toward that location, narrowing the search pattern and bringing hunter drones closer to the suspected position. The distance between detection and engagement began to shrink, and the margin for survival became extremely thin. FPV units moved through the area at low altitude, passing close enough to strike if a target was confirmed, but they required a clear visual or thermal lock before committing. Without that confirmation, they remained in a search pattern, covering different angles to force any hidden element into a reaction. This created a silent pressure, where the threat was present but not yet precise. Inside the concealed position, the Ukrainian team maintained complete discipline, avoiding any movement that could change their thermal profile or produce noise. Even small actions such as opening a door or shifting position could alter the heat pattern enough to stand out against the background. Time became the main factor, as each passing minute increased the chance that the search would move elsewhere. This moment shows a critical shift in how survival works under constant observation. When every movement can be detected and analyzed, stillness becomes a form of protection, and patience becomes more valuable than speed. The team was not escaping the search but outlasting it, allowing the detection cycle to lose accuracy as initial signals faded. Eventually, the reconnaissance pass moved beyond the immediate area without confirming a target, and the hunter drones followed new directions based on updated estimates. The search did not end, but its focus weakened, and that created a narrow window where the operators remained undetected. This phase did not involve direct combat, yet it was one of the most dangerous parts of the operation, because exposure at any moment would have led to immediate engagement. Survival depended on discipline rather than firepower, and on understanding how sensors interpret the environment rather than relying on traditional movement. So the question becomes clear. If every action can reveal a position, would staying still be the safest choice, or would trying to escape offer a better chance under pressure? The drone's most critical phase began when it entered mid-course flight and shifted into a mode designed to survive without being seen or heard. At this point, the UAV no longer depended on constant communication, and instead relied on its onboard navigation system to continue the mission with minimal external input. This system tracked direction, speed, and movement from the moment of launch, allowing it to calculate its position even when no signal was received. As a result, the aircraft could move forward in near silence, reducing its electronic footprint to almost zero. This change made detection far more difficult, because most tracking systems depend on either radar reflection or active signals. The drone presented very little of either. Its size and structure reduced the strength of radar returns, while its lack of transmission removed the most reliable method of identification. From the perspective of defense systems, it was not completely invisible, but it became inconsistent and hard to follow over time. Russian radar units were still able to capture brief moments where the UAV appeared on their screens, but these detections were short and incomplete. A single contact might last only a few seconds before disappearing again, leaving behind limited data that could not immediately produce a firing solution. These fragments were useful, but only when combined and analyzed over time. As the drone continued deeper into the defended zone, electronic warfare units began to respond more aggressively. Instead of trying to destroy the UAV directly, they focused on interfering with its navigation by targeting satellite signals. Jamming systems broadcast strong noise across the same frequencies used for positioning, creating an environment where accurate location data became unstable or unreliable. This created a form of pressure rather than direct destruction. The goal was to force the operators into a difficult decision. If they remained silent, the drone would continue on its internal guidance but risk drifting away from the intended path. If they attempted to reconnect and correct that drift, they would expose their position through a new transmission. Either choice carried risk, and both outcomes could be exploited. Inside the UAV, small errors began to build, as it relied only on internal sensors. Each second added a slight deviation, and over long distances, those deviations could grow large enough to affect the final approach. The system was designed to tolerate some level of inaccuracy, but it could not guarantee a precise hit without a final adjustment. On the ground, this created a silent standoff between two sides that could not see each other directly. One side waited for a signal that would reveal the operator's position, while the other delayed that signal as long as possible to avoid detection. Timing became the most important factor, because a transmission sent too early would give the defender more time to respond, while a transmission sent too late could leave no chance to correct the flight path. This phase did not involve visible explosions or direct engagement, yet it shaped everything that followed. Control of the airspace was no longer defined by missiles or interceptors, but by the ability to manage signals, delay exposure, and force the opponent into making a mistake under pressure. As the UAV moved closer to its destination, the situation became more tense with every kilometer, because the moment of contact could not be avoided forever. At some point, a decision would have to be made, and that decision would determine whether the mission succeeded or failed. So the question now becomes unavoidable. In a battlefield where silence can protect and a single signal can destroy, is electronic warfare becoming more dangerous than traditional air defense systems? The final phase began the moment the UAV approached its target area and reactivated its optical system, turning a silent flight into a race measured in seconds. As the drone closed in on Kacha airbase, its onboard camera came online and transmitted a limited video feed back to the operator. The image was not perfect, with delay and reduced clarity, but it was enough to identify key shapes on the ground. Runway lines, protective walls, and parked aircraft started to form into a recognizable picture, and within that frame, the MiG-29 appeared exactly where intelligence had predicted. At this point, the mission required human input again, because the accumulated drift from earlier navigation had shifted the flight path slightly away from the ideal line. The operator needed to make a small correction, not a large maneuver, but one precise adjustment that would align the UAV with the target. This was the most dangerous moment, because sending that correction meant breaking silence. The transmission lasted only a short time, but it was enough. Russian detection systems along the coast picked up the signal almost immediately, using passive receivers designed to catch even weak emissions leaking beyond the main direction of the antenna. Within seconds, multiple sensors captured the direction of the signal, and by combining those angles, they narrowed down a probable location for the source. Once that location was estimated, the response followed without delay. UAV units already positioned in the area were redirected toward the new coordinates, while artillery units prepared to strike the same grid. This reaction did not depend on full confirmation, because speed was more important than certainty. The goal was to overwhelm the area before the operators could move or shut down. On the Ukrainian side, the correction had already been sent, and the UAV adjusted its heading toward the center of the revetment. The MiG-29 grew larger in the frame, and the angle of approach became fixed. From that moment, the drone no longer needed further guidance because its final path was already locked in. What followed on the ground revealed the key decision that shaped the outcome. The signal detected by Russian systems did not come from the actual operators, but from a relay position that had been deliberately separated. This relay acted as a visible source, drawing attention and absorbing the response that followed. FPV drones struck the transmission point first, destroying the antenna and disabling the equipment. Artillery rounds landed soon after, hitting the same location and ensuring that nothing remained active. From the perspective of the response units, the threat had been neutralized because the signal had disappeared and the source had been destroyed. But in reality, the core team remained untouched, positioned away from the relay and no longer transmitting. By the time the strike reached its target, the UAV was already committed to its final descent, and there was no longer a need for control from the ground. Seconds later, the drone impacted the MiG-29 inside the protective structure. The warhead detonated on contact, sending a shockwave through the aircraft and igniting fuel within the confined space. Fire rose above the walls, followed by secondary explosions as onboard systems reacted to the heat. When the smoke cleared, the aircraft was no longer operational, reduced to damaged structure and debris. At nearly the same time, another strike targeted radar infrastructure near Simferopol, reinforcing that this operation was coordinated rather than isolated. Multiple assets were engaged within a narrow window, creating pressure across different layers of defense. In the end, both sides executed their roles with speed and precision, but the outcome was decided by a single layer of deception and timing. One side tracked the signal correctly, but hit the wrong element, while the other used that expectation to complete the mission. So the question now becomes unavoidable. In those final 90 seconds, where exactly did the balance shift? And was it a mistake in detection or a success in deception? A single drone strike has just destroyed a MiG-29 inside what was supposed to be a protected airbase. And that moment may say more about the future of war than any large-scale battle. This was not just about one aircraft being lost, but about how a low-cost system moved across hundreds of kilometers, avoided detection, survived electronic pressure, and struck a high-value target at the exact point where defense was expected to hold. That gap between detection and decision may now be one of the most important factors in modern combat. If this pattern continues, then distance may no longer protect critical assets, and the idea of a safe rear area could start to disappear. Air bases, radar systems, and logistics hubs may all face the same level of risk as frontline positions, especially when attacks can be repeated at low cost. So the real question is no longer whether this kind of strike will happen again, but how often it can be repeated, and how defenses will adapt when the threat is constant and difficult to predict. Do you think systems like this can be stopped effectively, or will they keep reshaping how wars are fought in the coming years? If you want to stay updated on how modern battlefields are evolving, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more in-depth analysis.